Hi, this is Paul. This conversation, Jordan Peterson and Dallas Jenkins, hit. And a lot of people have talked about it, and there's some real reasons why this hit. And we're going to talk about them. And this, to me, is part of what's behind my trying to get a word around the spirit that I'm now calling metagelicalism. Now, Dallas Jenkins, he mentions in this he's the son of a very successful writer. Well, who's the writer that he's the son of? He is, well, Dallas Jenkins is the son of Jerry B. Jenkins, who co-wrote the Left Behind series. Now, I know there's a bunch of you who have no idea what the Left Behind series is, but if you grew up evangelical, you could not have missed the Left Behind series. The Left Behind series was an uber popular novelistic dispensationalist, that's the theological tag, for, end times novels. This was a huge deal. And it penetrated far beyond just dispensational churches, penetrated a lot of churches, and was probably the most successful evangelical novel enterprise of a certain time period. And so now his son is the creator of what is the most popular Jesus film representation of this time period. When I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, a very popular thing for some missionaries to do was to go into areas and show the Jesus film to remote locations. They would go with a generator and a sheet, and they would set up the projector, and they would show that Jesus film. And there was all sorts of money raised all over the world to show Jesus films. And there have been lots of Jesus films made over the years. I've collected a bunch of them. It was super interesting the moment that Dallas Jenkins says to Jordan Peterson, refers to the Jesus movie, and then there's all these other Jesus movies, and Jordan hadn't watched any of them. Jordan had watched The Chosen, partly because The Chosen was so popular. And again, Jordan Peterson is a social scientist, and he uses numbers and popularity to judge impact, and that's to a degree how he chooses his guests and what he pays attention to. And because The Chosen has been enormously popular, it wasn't terribly surprising to me that he had the creator of The Chosen on his channel. Just recently, ABC News had a thing on YouTube about The Chosen. The Chosen has gotten a lot of attention, but what has been interesting to me is just how broad The Chosen's fan base is. Dallas Jenkins mentions that 30% of his viewership is, now I'm trying to figure out the right term, unchurched was a popular term during the seeker movement for people who, they might be Christ haunted, they might have some Tom Holland Christian DNA in their worldview, in their background, in their culture, but they don't actively go to church. I don't know if that's the 30% or the 30% might answer on a quiz whether or not you believe in God. It's the part of the difficulty with these kinds of numbers in terms of religious polling is just how to ask the questions, because, and of course, depending on how you ask the questions, you'll get a certain kind of answer. So, but this series has been, as I mentioned before, well, I've had two experiences with The Chosen. One, it was so popular, I thought I'll sit down and watch it, and I started it, and within not too many minutes, I was just sort of, I don't really want to watch this, another sort of Jesus film thing. And so I left it go. But then, as I mentioned recently, I was flying back from the East Coast on an airplane, and someone was watching The Chosen on the seat ahead of me in the airplane, and it was quiet and dark, and everyone was sleeping, and I just they had the subtitles on so I could read it, and I was watching, and I found it kind of compelling. So I've had two first impressions, a first impression and a second impression of The Chosen. That doesn't mean I'm going to sit down and watch it all, but it was, but the what has gathered my interest has been the interest in The Chosen and why the interest in The Chosen. So I found this video very interesting on that score alone. But this was interesting on a whole bunch of other scores. And so what I'm going to do is I have 3 clips that I'm going to play, and that's how I'm going to approach this video and do some of my commentary on these 3 clips, because this is very much behind what I sort of see as the metagelical moment. Now, what do I mean by metagelical? This is the latest evolution. This is the evolution of evangelicalism after the death of facts and the new epistemic revolution and all of these things that I've been talking about in a variety of videos that this little corner has been fixated on. I can call it the recession of modernity. I know all of these terms are fraught. None of these terms are perfect, which is why I'm always looking for new words or new terms to try to get at what I'm getting at, because the old terms are too fraught. So let's go to the clip so we can begin to see what I'm talking about. Okay, here's the first one.
About it, Jim.
So in the moment, a bad thing has happened, but it's the precursor to some.
Okay, what's the bad thing? He is a movie maker, and he released a movie, and it bombed. And there's all these metrics that they can tell very early on. Is this movie going to go anywhere? Is this movie not going to go anywhere? He had all his hopes on this movie, and the movie bombed. And so he is watching this catastrophe unfold, and now there's going to be a story.
Thing great. So what is it? We know that Jesus is about to do something extraordinary in the feeding of the 5,000. So what is God about to do with us? And we're thinking.
So that's at least a possibility.
Okay, now, a lot of, all the way back to the beginning of the biblical series, what was Jordan doing? I've always likened Jordan to a preacher. Why? I've talked about Stott. Stott wrote a book on preaching between two worlds, because you're trying to bring these two worlds together, the world of the Bible. And when I say the world of the Bible, all you little modernist, materialist, reductionists out there, they think the world of the Bible means all of the, the stuff. No, the story, the world of the Bible is the story. Was the story connected to stuff, disconnected to stuff? Yes, of course it's connected to stuff, but pay attention. The world of the story. You're trying to bring the story of the Bible into the story of people's lives. Oh, you mean people's lives don't have stuff? Yeah, people's lives have stuff too. You're just not paying attention to where the conversation has gone. I get it. How can everybody keep up? I completely understand, but the story of the Bible with the story of your life. And so generally speaking, the concordist move that Jordan Peterson has done is take the story of the Bible and connect it to the archetypes and the story of people's lives, but that tends to be, for the most part, a process of turning something theoretical or abstract, and then the person sorts of brings it down into their concrete. This is what preachers do in many cases. Now, Jenkins is a full-blown relational ontology evangelical. He is. This is who he is. And this move goes back to the born again movement, goes back to the Jesus revolution, goes back to this movement when the mainline dominance was beginning to recess in America. Think around Watergate. Chuck Colson is an incredibly important figure in there. And suddenly Christians began saying things like, Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. You need to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. This is sort of the great welling up of God number 2 and the recession of God number 1 in the late 20th century, and what happened in the churches. The people leaving the main line in droves, going into evangelical churches in droves, not groves. One of the videos I got all the way through was Mark D. Parker's conversation with Glenn Schroeder. I've really loved what Mark and Ron have done in this corner of the corner, where they have been able to create a space for personal relationship evangelicals in the corner, and increasingly personal relationship metagelicals, because the corner is very metagelical. And, I thought it's a great title, Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp. He talks about John Wimber. You've got all of these people like Douglas Murray and Alex O'Connor who are looking for a sign from God, a voice from God, something like this. Well, I'll tell you, in the 1970s and 80s, where people were looking for a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that's exactly what they were getting. They were getting signs from God. And once they got this sign from God, they were ready to live relationally with God. I was able to find my, I got to bring her up here. Hang on. There she is. I was able to find Verizon Lisa. And again, when people sort of walk away from having a name for their God, that's at least, even though God is not a name, God is a noun, but not really a proper noun. The Lord is sort of the proper noun for the name God in Christianity, but most people don't know that. So when people sort of walk away from having a God that has a name or an established religion, then they start not saying God, and they just start saying universe. And I used Verizon Lisa in a number of videos early on, because this was even before the rise of Android in some ways. And she would walk around and Universe wanted her to go into a Verizon store and get a new phone. This kind of relationality, going all the way back to the Things 1 and Things 2, this kind of relationality is the way people relate to the world. And that's part of the reason that Jordan Peterson keeps talking about stories and narratives, because this is how people manage their world, because it's actually a better way to manage their world. And actually in this conversation, there's a great section where Peterson contrasts Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. Well, maybe I'll play it.
Gift, and it's...
Well, my father is an author of over 200 books. He's one of the most prolific authors of all time.
Right, so you came by it honestly.
So again, his father is the co-author, probably the one who did all the heavy lifting in terms of the narrative of the Left Behind series. It's an enormously popular book series. I mean, made into a movie, but sort of segmented over into for the most part, over into the religious camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm a storyteller in the classroom. I was a storyteller when I wasn't supposed to be. I've always been a storyteller. So when a pastor is unpacking 3 to 4 verses with an intellectual conclusion, the part that speaks most to me is the story part of it.
Yeah.
What might have been the backstory? I'm like, well, I'm on the case.
You see with Christ's parables frequently, like...
And so again, here, and this is sort of the metagelical happening here. And this is the evolution from the evangelical. Again, read Molly Worthen's Apostles of Reason, where she didn't necessarily use these terms, because at that point, I certainly didn't have, I don't think she had, the awareness of sort of the recession of modernity, this epistemic revolution that is underway. Evangelicals really worked hard. You can see this in terms of the formation of apologetics. Evangelicals really worked hard to try to make the faith reasonable. And what reasonable meant was, again, foundationalist, tied to events, because that was the vision, that was the religion of it, in that sense, sort of the age of reason.
An amalgam of those two approaches, because he'll tell a story, and then the disciples, for example, will say, well, thank you, but we don't really get it. And then he'll lay out the explanation. I've certainly found in my lectures that the most effective way of driving a point home is to tell a story and to...
And every preacher will learn that, because people will forget your points, but they will remember your illustrations.
Provide an explanation, right? The story is brought... It's like the playoff intellectually between Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, who are aiming in very similar directions. Dostoevsky's stories cover a much broader territory than Nietzsche's thinking, but they're less explicit, right? They're less propositional. So that there's a loss there because it's not as defined. Nietzsche is more defined and more specific, but there's a loss because the expanse that Dostoevsky covers is broad. I'll give you an example. So in the Brothers Karamazov, the hero is a novitiate named Alyosha, and he's contrasted. Alyosha is a very good person, but he's not an intellectual, and his arguments aren't as tightly formulated and pointed as they might be. He's often at a loss for words. His brother Ivan is hyper charismatic and unbelievably pointed in his propositional reasoning, and if he goes head to head with the Alyosha, he can win the argument. But he loses the battle because as the story unfolds, you see that the goodness of Alyosha triumphs over the Luciferian rationality of Ivan. Ivan wins all the battles, you might say, but loses the war. And Dostoevsky could portray that because he used a story. Like Nietzsche, as a philosopher, would have to make the philosophical case for Alyosha. That isn't what happens in Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky shows what happens as Alyosha's life unfolds. He does the same thing in his book, The Idiot, which is about a prince who's an analog of Christ, who is a holy fool and who people have some pity for. But he's a very good person, and you see that unfold in the story. Right. Dostoevsky's showing how a life well lived is triumphs over an argument well formulated. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Correct.
Okay, back to the miracle.
Way of thinking about it, yeah.
So in the moment, a bad thing has happened, but it's the precursor to something great. So what is it? We know that Jesus is about to do something extraordinary in the feeding of the 5,000. So what is God about to do with us? And we're thinking...
So that's at least a possibility then.
Yeah, maybe. We think...
Right there. There's the relational. Jesus, they're in the story. Jesus is about to do something with the 5,000. And that means God is about to do something with us. So they put themselves into the story. And this is the heart of what so many people revolt against, because they say, well, it's just arbitrary. And, well, there's the question. Is it not arbitrary? Now, you might declare it arbitrary. It might be arbitrary for you, but not arbitrary for me. And suddenly we're going round and round with all kinds of little arguments we've had forever.
And tonight, the numbers might so dramatically shift in a miraculous way that God will get glory and that our movie will actually surprise and counteract the math equation that has taken place.
Now, part of why people are so excited about this is that this is their primary faith language. This is their way of talking, and this is not really Jordan Peterson's primary way of talking. And people have been longing for Jordan Peterson to start talking like this. And now this guy is here and he's talking like this and he's having a compelling conversation with Jordan Peterson. And so for many people, when you ask them, what would it mean for Jordan Peterson to become a Christian? A lot of it is Jordan Peterson would start talking this way. And as I mentioned, this enormous, this is another awakening in American culture. I don't know how many we can have, but this rolled through America sort of with the Jesus movement, with evangelicalism. And again, you can read George Marsden on fundamentalism in American history, and that a certain element of those fundamentalists became evangelicals, and evangelical churches, especially with sort of the decline of the main line, that sort of in Jordan Peterson terms, God got so far away, people could no longer sort of connect with him down here. Chuck Colson's story is a huge part of that, and a lot of that is distilled in this book. At least when I bought the Kindle book, new edition of the 2 million copy bestseller by Chuck Colson, Born Again. And I remember Jimmy Carter, when he won the White House, Time Magazine had Born Again right there. So this is for boomers, this is their religious revival in America. And now this book is just dripping with this for Chuck Colson, because religion became a thing sort of out there to a personal relationship with God, a personal relationship with Jesus. You can almost dip anywhere in this book and find the transformation. What form was it to take? Again, I prayed for help. Again, the answer came through events. Events, okay? As I recorded more from my prison experience and letters to my friends, I felt God's hand on my shoulder. Put aside all their theories for now, because it's sort of personal relationship versus theory. I seem to tell the story of one life, yours. But who was I to moralize, to preach to others? I'd botch it. Was I the one who helped bring on Watergate and was in prison to prove it? Well, maybe that very fact, plus some unusual things that had happened to me, could give me some insights that would help others. Could there be a purpose to all that had happened to me? And then I began to see it. The nation was in darkness. There was anger, bitterness, disillusionment across the land. While my inclination was to think in terms of grandiose reforms, God seemed to be saying that the renewal of our national spirit can begin with each person. It's a deeply evangelical theme. With the renewal of individual spirit. But now individualism, evangelicalism, deeply tied. Jordan Peterson, when he first started cooking things in 17 and 18, his vision was one person at a time and one man at a time, in a sense, standing up. And that's why I made early connections to Peterson and Billy Graham, early connections to the Peterson phenomena and the Promise Keepers movement. There's been deep ties with this all along. And I think for that reason, a lot of evangelicals very quickly saw Peterson as almost one of us. Submit yourself. Or, if you want to do something, submit yourself to me, and I will guide you, were the words implanted in my mind. That was his relationship with God. Submit yourself. Our founding fathers had built a nation on this principle, that fallible men are nothing unless they learn to depend on God. And again, you can have all of these themes of a Christian nation and, all of that stuff. It was to establish a true community of believers that the Puritans came to this continent. Whereas at sea aboard the Arbella, John Winthrop articulated the vision. The God of Israel is among us. We shall be a city upon a hill. They saw the destination not as political conquerors, but as disciples of Jesus, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, are the solemn words of the Declaration of Independence. Our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, died on Good Friday. He is the Jesus Christ of American civil religion, Abe Lincoln is, at least for much of the nation. Humbly acknowledged that without God, I must fail. How magnificent God has honored the covenant of our forefathers, how richly he blessed our nation. So deep are our religious roots, but so far have we strayed. Him following the Quaker, Richard Milhouse Nixon.
And so we're thinking, don't be surprised if tonight the numbers magically, supernaturally, miraculously turn around.
Magically, miraculously, supernaturally are all synonyms for him.
The equation that Hollywood is used to is upended. And what is about to happen to us is what happened to the people who were hungry and desperate 2,000 years ago. So
there's the relationality. And again, the connection is relational fundamentally. I look at my definition of Christianity. Someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. Point two, Lord, Lord, did we not heal the sick and raise the dead? Depart from me, I never knew you. It's fundamentally relational. Yeah, But again, for Peterson, his gospel tends to be much more put yourself in alignment with the patterns of the universe, and then you succeed. Learn the patterns of the universe, put yourself in alignment with them, and then you can climb up the mountain. Relationality is much more cry out to Jesus and he will pull you out of the storm-tossed sea so that you can walk on water.
That night, the numbers got worse.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going, okay.
So much for that hypothesis.
Yes. So we're back to square one. And now I go to the former, when you had the two options of, is it a practical mistake? Is it an error that was made? Or is it a foundational problem? Okay, well.
And this, of course, is where a lot of skeptics sort of straw-menned Christianity because they thought, well, Christians are dupes who just believe in these crazy narratives. But again, if you read someone like Lerman, she'll show you when she was embedded in the Vineyard Church. So the guy that Mark D. Parker was talking about was someone that was there at the beginning of the Vineyard Church. No, Christians are actually very agile in sort of working through these things relationally. But then again, this has launched a lot of deconstruction, because it's sort of like, well, they weren't agile enough to work themselves into another. And it also provokes a lot of skepticism and a lot of cynicism. Well, these Christians will make up any story for anything. And, go ahead, leave the comments. Some of you that I know are going to leave comments about all of this. Go right ahead. But right here is in many ways the line of confrontation that I think all of this new atheism and skepticism and deconstruction, it's all about, how can I relate to this God? And this is where Peterson sort of became kind of a halfway house, because this relationality was always deeply psychological, but it was also personal. And Peterson making the psychological a little bit more scientific, pattern, sort of picking up and saying, well, these are the archetypes, the patterns. It sort of gave a little comfort and shelter to people sort of being able to once again re-engage in a relational mode.
I'm going to go now to my brain is now back to how I normally am. And I'm going to do what I normally do. I'm going to get online. I'm going to pull up Microsoft Word, and I'm going to do a 15-page memo analyzing all the errors and strategies that were mistaken to lead me to this point.
See, Christians can do reason too.
So I'm writing it out. This is what I did wrong. To my credit, I'm taking blame. I'm not putting blame on anyone else. I was wrong. I missed it. I'm on page 14 of my 15-page memo analyzing everything that went wrong. Ping, something pops up on my computer. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Message pops up on Facebook Messenger from someone I've never met. We're friends on Facebook. We've talked maybe once a year. Doesn't say hi, doesn't say hello. Just ping. Remember, your job is not to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish. So I pause for a moment.
Again, look what he did in the story. He's back in the story. He's seeing the story as the filter through which he has his value hierarchy. So all the Peterson stuff about narrative, he's just naturally engaging with it and using that machinery to decide to go about his business. Now, Jordan's listening carefully and
wonder if genuinely, was my computer recording what Amanda and I talked about today? How does this person know to speak to this thing we've been wrestling with all day?
Yeah,
so
that's a weird coincidence.
So my response,
to say the least.
Yeah, so I didn't say, hey, Alex, nice to hear from you. I just go, what are you doing up at 4 a.m? Because I'm trying to analyze. He says, oh, I'm in Romania. I'm on the other side of the world right now. I just heard about your movie, and I wanted to say that. And I said, before I respond, can I ask you why you told me that? And he said, oh, that wasn't me. God told me to tell you that.
Okay, so tell me the message again.
Remember,
yeah,
your job is not to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish.
Okay, so what did you make of that?
So I first had to...
Now, I would say that anyone who has been acculturated and familiar with evangelicalism and, let's say, relational evangelicalism, it's an obvious message. It's just so clear, because we are so used to making this move into the story that, oh, okay, because we, like he talks about later, doing with the chosen, this is exactly the thing he's done. He's sort of broken out of all the other Jesus movie, modernist Jesus movies where everyone is in the theater just sort of taking notes and making sure that Jesus doesn't say a single word in the movie that they can't find in one of the canonical Gospels. Forget it. Forget about it. Not going to happen. What's this evangelical move? Okay, well, clearly there was some people who, because Jesus says, Jesus set the whole thing up. That's what he began saying. Jesus knows they're all going to be hungry. He knows he's going to do this miracle. And so he says, go out and see what's at hand. Go out and, and then, of course, American Bible story books will have some little boy opening his lunch, little Oliver Twist scene, and instead of saying, "Can I have some more?" they'll say, "Here's my fish, here's my loaves," and Jesus will multiply it. And so, it's not hard to know what it means.
My life changed in that moment because my question about whether or not God was present was clearly answered. He's telling I found.
And again, evangelicals aren't dupes. They're always dealing with this question. Again, read T.H. Lerman and When God Talks Back. And she's done all the anthropology on this stuff. And anybody who's lived with it or lives it knows how all this works. He's not dumb.
Found out later that Alex said he was walking home from the grocery store and he looked up my movie, saw it was a failure. He had enjoyed it. He had seen it himself. He was disappointed. And he felt just as clearly as my wife had felt God putting her into the story of the feeding 5,000, he felt God putting it on his heart. Tell Dallas it's not his job to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish. And he said, "No, I barely know Dallas. That's a very condescending thing to say to somebody who's clearly..."
Well, and a strange thing. It's like its meaning is opaque. And
Yes.
It's a very particular reference, right?
Right. And
Contextless.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So he wrestles with that and doesn't want to do that and thinks ultimately, well, God won't let me off the mat. He keeps pressing this into me. So, okay, I'm going to share this with Dallas. It's 4 a.m. back there anyway, so he won't see it for a while anyway. And of course, he gets this immediate response and informs me that God had been pressing it on his heart to tell me that. So 2 things happen. Number 1, it all hit me in that moment. Like I understood what he meant, and that's what you're asking. So in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus could have, assuming you believe the story and you believe all the stories of the miracles that he performed, he could have manifested loaves and fish from nothing.
Now, this might seem a little sidebar, but it's also, look at what Dallas Jenkins is wearing. He's wearing a T-shirt. He's wearing a coat. He's wearing jeans. He's wearing 3 stripes. Is that Adidas sneakers? Hollywood, casual, California. Jordan, of course. Wearing a coat, dress shoes, dress pants, not a tie. It's just so here we have cultures. And again, Dallas Jenkins is about as royalty evangelical as they can come. If you're the son of the co-author of the Left Behind series, that is nosebleed evangelical elite. But in terms of evangelical elites, tend to dress down. It's much more of a populist movement. It's much more of one among the people movement.
And he could have fed 5,000 people, and the loaves and fish could have just emerged in their laps. But he says, I need food. Someone bring me some food. Bring me something. And a boy brings 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus takes those 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he blesses them, and then multiplies them to the point where we can feed 5,000 people. And so why does he do that? Why does he involve us, or in the case of this story, the boy, in the process when he doesn't have to? So the principle of your job is to not be responsible to feed 5,000, to not think of the results. I'm a results guy. I'm a problem solver. The numbers didn't match. We didn't feed 5,000. It failed. And this gentleman is telling me, no, that's not your job to worry about. You didn't fail.
I see. So you're looking at the wrong marker of success in relationship to your endeavor. So as long as you did the right thing all the way along, which is something you have to contend with in relationship to your call.
Okay, now notice the mode. There's a subtle shift in mode here. Peterson is back in some ways in a deist impersonal universe. All of Dallas Jenkins' language has been relational. Peterson tends to be much more mechanical. You can feel the difference between them here. Let's see, do I have a few seconds back on this little thing?
1,000. It failed. And this gentleman is telling me, no, that's not your job to worry about. You didn't fail. You
I see. So you're looking at the wrong marker of success
Yes.
in relationship to your endeavor. So as long as you did the right thing all the way along, which is something you have to contend with
Correct.
in relationship to your conscience, the outcome is not the measure.
Correct. So in that
In relationship to your conscience, the first, the foreshadowing chapter of We Who Wrestle with God is all about conscience. And if you remember, Jordan comes right back from his illness. Big theme in those very early videos, conscience, sort of divinizing the conscience. But again, it's sort of, for Peterson, the world remains fundamentally, in some ways, pagan. If you look at Ezekiel Kaufman's dichotomy between the Hebrews and everyone else, because it's a relational ontology, because God is arena and agent for the Hebrews. But for Peterson, you did everything wrong. You missed the formula. You didn't put the ingredients in. If you put the ingredients in, then you'll have success. All of the agency is much more on our side, and reality is just sort of stored potentiality that if you access it properly, you can get what you want and you can have success. And this is why, again, often people who listen to Jordan will say, his God sounds like a theory. And so I think, again, there's some deism in Jordan's language about the interaction, whereas Dallas Jenkins is full-blown relationality.
moment when I'm literally analyzing what I did wrong,
Right.
coming off of a day of wrestling with the story of the feeding the 5,000, this gentleman randomly out of the blue tells me it's not that. It's not that you failed per se. It's not that now we could argue about, did I make the best 5 loaves and 2 fish? Was the recipe a good recipe? Did I? That's a whole separate topic. But the answer comes a year later, and the answer comes as we're talking today.
Because what's going to set up is that, no, this was to dig into some evangelical means and tropes. This was a northern star. This is what God was bringing you to follow in order to turn the course so you could go somewhere else. And again, I'm not, when I point this out, I'm not skeptical about it. This is the pastoral language I use regularly, but I want to notice that it is in fact a language. And what's interesting here, again, this is why I think so many people are so excited about this conversation, is that Dallas Jenkins is bringing the relationship. He's bringing the personal relationship. This is exactly where a significant number of people, not just evangelicals, Protestants, but Catholics, Orthodox, this is where they're all coming with their relationality. Okay, next clip.
You're right, but you said something like you determined at that moment that the outcome wasn't the proper measure, and then you described how using the outcome as the measure could be contaminated by your own self-interest, your pride, your desire to be attractive to people, to be...
Okay, contaminated. This is lab talk. He's a social scientist. He's looking for the formula to get the outcome from the standing potential always there. If we do the right thing, the outcome will come.
Be accepted in Hollywood, all of that. So there's a pride element to that. You said instead that you were going to adjudicate the moral acceptability of your actions by what? By determining whether they were an accurate, a genuine reflection of your relationship, what, with God?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly to you?
Yeah.
Like, take that apart, because that's...
He's noticing. This guy. This is how this guy sees the world. period. And no amount of pointing out difficulties in finding the census in Luke, or finding an ossuary that says Jesus on it. No amount to that is going to shake this guy. This is his native language, and Peterson's got this language. He's been developing it. He's embraced. I mean, Peterson is certainly being seen as a friend here and an ally, but Peterson is paying attention to this language. And again, partly because they didn't grow up in it. Now, a bunch of you are getting triggers and hives for all kinds of other reasons. I get it. But that's what makes this interview so interesting.
It's analogous to this notion of the truth will set you free as a definition, right? So you said you're switching the criteria that you're using.
That's a definition. Again, Peterson, he's trying to translate, because remember Peterson's big project. He wants to take all of this, but he wants to have it in a form that fundamentally scientific materialists can agree on. So he has to keep translating the relational into the formulaic.
Yes. Okay. How did you come up with the new criteria, and how do you know that you're genuinely applying those criteria, in a way that isn't contaminated, let's say, by pride and self-interest?
I actually wrote about it on Facebook a few days later. I did this long post where I just said, okay, I'm not going to pretend that I can convince you to go see this movie now. I've surrendered it. Here's what's happened. It failed. Period. End of sentence. Now what? Why do I feel, I actually use the word free. Why do I feel more freedom right now than at any other time in my life? The truth will set you free. What does that freedom come from?
And that was the experience you had.
Oh, absolutely. So in that moment, I went from, how do I wrestle with this? How do I understand? What went wrong? Was it me? Was it God? Was it Satan? Was it my friends? Was it the studio? What?
Was it me? Was it God? Was it Satan? This is a, I mean, again, Dreer is talking about an enchanted world, and Kingsnorth pushes back on the whole enchanted thing and says enchantment is about illusion. It's been fascinating watching Kingsnorth and Dreer just on two different sides of this. And of course, both new converts to orthodoxy. And that leads you to say, okay, what exactly are they converted into? And so, again, anybody who's evangelical who grew up in this space, when you listen to Dallas Jenkins talk, this is your mother tongue.
What brought me to this place? It didn't matter anymore. In my life right now, for the first time in decades, I was perfectly willing to never make another film or TV show if that's what God wanted. Now, I didn't know if that was what God wanted. I didn't know what the future held.
Okay, so deeply God number two. God wants, God cares, God looks. This is not God as a theoretical idea. This is not God simply as an arena available to us. Remember, I said when I watched Peterson and Harris talking, the video of them talking, their first talk in Vancouver, it just became abundantly clear. Sam Harris is railing against the God of Dallas Jenkins. Jordan Peterson comes up with the Arenic God, and Sam Harris doesn't quite know what to do. And we're continuing, but of course, Christianity, as I've said, and then I talked about God number one, God number two, and people are all, well, what about God number three? No. That's not God number three. It's these dualities. It's these dichotomies that we're dealing with here. It's the agent-arena relationship. There isn't a number three in the agent-arena relationship.
Business.
How do you think that transformation came about? I mean, it's linked to this message that you had received.
So again, Peterson is doing his analysis. Peterson is trying to get his head around this culture, this mode, Jenkins talked about a transformational moment. And what's key in this, and this will really come about when they start talking about puppets on strings, because of course, for Jenkins, he is attached. He's got a secure attachment with his God. We can use attach at the psychological relational attachment language with this. His attachment is secure. So when his Heavenly Father says no, he believes that his Heavenly Father will have something good in the future for him, even if it's not his dream. Deeply relational. You don't get that potentiality so much with God as storehouse of potentiality, because it's all up to you. And you might succeed or you might fail, and it's on you. And again, Jordan's religious universe is full of that. So when you fail, it's hell, and when you succeed, it's heaven. And there's no depths to how much more hell you can make. That's the theoretical, psychological universe. But what's really amazing about this is it's going to stand in stark contrast to the relational, because Jenkins is basically going to say, this is catastrophic, this is devastating, but I'm securely attached to my Heavenly Father. And again, read the Heidelberg Catechism, read Christians for Ages. This is basically the kinds of things they'll say.
And the timeliness of that,
and the delivery of the message, the fact that the message was, could you call this a coincidence? Could you call it
it's
just
quite
random?
a coincidence.
It's such an extraordinary coincidence. Similar, I've heard your story. You talk about your wife, what God put on her heart, how she knew.
Oops, working my buttons here. Now you get to see, well, Jenkins has been watching Peterson and his story, and when he heard the story with Tammy, that translated easily that God, in fact, go back to the Vervaeke Peugeot video where, why does God care? Why does God want? Again, those are all God number 2 agentic faculties that are about. And so now Jenkins, he's an evangelical, he's a missionary, he's going to be leaning into this thing.
Right.
And you go,
Yes, it's quite a coincidence.
It's such a coincidence that I must.
You're kind of screwed both ways when a coincidence like that shows up.
Yes.
Because you either don't believe it or you believe it. It's like both are absurd in a way.
The secularist or the humanist or the atheist would say, Dallas, it is a coincidence.
Right.
These things happen all the time.
The group on the underside of the culture always knows the dominant culture better. And evangelicals know very well how to code switch in terms of their talking with respect to all of this, but they're fundamentally relational.
I don't even know how you would calculate the odds of a coincidence like that. Right.
I can't. And so I must accept God is clearly in this. He is clearly communicating to me. What must I draw from this? Well, I've attended business seminars. Every filmmaker will tell you to have a plan, 5-year plan. Where are you going to be at in 5 years?
Right, yeah.
And Phil Vischer, who's the creator of VeggieTales, and had which was 25 years ago, huge. And
again, evangelical elite, Phil Vischer. Nobody's as evangelical elite as Phil Vischer. Now, some of you, I just triggered you because I said Phil Vischer, and so Hank, you're triggered. I know you're triggered, Hank. Jacob is going to be super triggered by a bunch of this stuff.
And he had a similar crisis of faith. He lost it all. He was left barren and found that God was trying to just get his attention. God was saying to him, I don't care what you.
If you haven't read, I really loved Phil's book, Me, Myself, and Bob, where Phil Vischer sort of runs through the whole story of it and how he lost Bob and Larry in bankruptcy court. And, but again, Phil Vischer he's an evangelical. And this is where I'd say the Metagelicals are going to be an interesting tribe because, well, we'll get to the fact that Rumi, well, let's play this out first.
You do for me. I care that you're doing it with me. I want you. I don't care about what you're giving me. That was his ultimate message.
See, now it isn't the success. It isn't any of these. What's fundamental is the relationship. Now, again, it was so interesting when, theosis sort of came up as a new word for people. It's like, oh, the Orthodox have theosis. And the Catholics are like, we got theosis too. And Protestants were like, we don't use funny words like that. We use, union with Christ. We can use psychological and secure attachment with God, personal transformation, godliness, Christ-likeness. It's all over the place. It's the same. We're hunting for something, we're hunting for the same thing here, union with God. And then of course, Wayne Dyer, New Age, you can see, return to the source.
I'll let him speak for himself. But one of the things he said to me was, where you're at in 5 years is none of your business. So that, for me, was...
Just in case you missed it, one of the things God said to him, okay? Now, it doesn't mean he necessarily heard an audible voice, but he's reading the events. Again, read T.H. Lerman on this, because she walks through it all.
An extraordinary thought, because I'm someone...
that's a weird one, too, because I do believe that it's useful for people to flesh out a vision.
Yes.
Right? But you have to do that in a kind of a detached way. You have to understand that that's a first pass approximation and it's necessary, but you don't want to fall in love with it. You don't want to be wedded to it. You don't want to worship it as a final end.
Again, now Peterson's, he's code switching into his code. And in a lot of ways, that's what conversations are. They're sort of comparing notes, code switching back and forth. But again, what's so interesting about this is the contrast.
Let's say. Now, it's also interesting that this message you got, it's so pointed in relationship to how your attitude changed, because you said, this is the other part of this that's too coincidental in a way, because what your friend from the message delivered from Romania said to you was that your criteria for success was inappropriate. It's very targeted, especially for that moment. So it's not only the...
He didn't say your criteria for success was inappropriate. Well, he kind of did. If you translate, it's not yours to multiply the loaves and fishes. Your criteria for success is inappropriate. It's the same message. I mean, Peterson's not wrong in his translation, but the mode of language for both of them, someone will much more understand the narrative.
Coincidence of the overlap in theme. It's that the message that you received was dead relevant to the problem you were trying to solve,
and to the person
in a revolutionary way.
Yes.
Right. So now you have a different hallmark for success. And one of the proofs that message struck home and was accurate was that instead of being in desperation as a consequence of the collapse of your vision, you said that perversely even you felt free.
Yes.
Right? That's very unlikely, right? That's a very unlikely outcome. The most unlikely outcome is you're shattered, at least for a good while.
Right.
And that would also indicate that you were laboring under a burden of success definition that was actually not good for you at all.
I was a performer. I was performance-based.
That's a puppet. That's like the Pinocchio puppet, right? Performing for the stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my
That's
strings
being an actor. Yeah.
So you could say, well, your strings were cut.
This is the moment where
no, my actually strings became stronger.
He's attached. This is his attachment to his Heavenly Father. And so the trial was actually a strengthening. And John Calvin, Jacob wrestling with God, with his left hand he fights us, with his right hand he upholds us, with his own, because how could we fight with the Lord? Only by the strength he gives us.
The audience was removed from the equation. Am I still willing to be a boy on a string? Am I still willing to be in service to God? Am I still willing to bend the knee and commit to a life of more of him, less of me? I am in service to him, even if there's not an audience.
There you go. It's the ongoing process of theosis for him. Am I, even with this difficulty, do I believe God will turn this adversity to my good? In Heidelberg Catechism.
Yeah, but that's voluntary.
Yeah.
That's the difference between...
And Peterson is right here, because, it's a voluntary attachment. And that's part of the reason that the deconstruction stories are so painful, because they had done so much voluntary attachment, and then they themselves sever it. And it's this open wound in so many of them. It's the pain of a divorce.
That being a puppet dancing on strings, right?
Well,
it can be voluntary submission isn't dancing to the piper's tune. It's a different game.
Fair.
Yeah.
But I, in that moment, said, okay, okay, God, I crumple up the 15 pages. I give up even, so that's the past, but I
Not your will, but thine be done.
also crumple up the future. I don't know what my future is.
right,
and I'm
right.
okay with that for the first time in my life. It may mean I don't ever make
Why
another
were
movie
you
or two.
okay?
Because I understood who God was and what and it was so clear he was present
Because of his attachment.
that I was like, whatever those 5 loaves and fish are, I'm okay as long as
I'm
you're
willing to go along with it.
Yes, and so if that means we're driving a bus just so that I'm supporting my family, that's okay, because what's more important is that I'm in your will and that I'm not basing my success or failure or my mood.
And I think Peterson is handling this perfectly. This is the best interview Peterson. This is the best mode interview Peterson gets into. He's curious. He's engaged. And you can see why, he was, as those who had him as a clinical psychologist said, he was terrific because he's doing it here.
My who I am as a husband and father, on how well
Your identity.
Yeah, better. Yeah, thank you. My identity in how people see me. My identity in the Bible talks about the fear of man.
Yeah, right.
I had a fear of man more that I didn't maybe know. I wouldn't have maybe admitted that about myself, but clearly I knew.
He discovered an idol in his heart, and now what the failure did was expose the idol. He had to remove the idol from the heart, or Jesus took the idol out of his heart, and now his attachment with his heavenly Father is stronger, and now he can weather. And of course, that then will set up in this story the great success, which is him being able to do The Chosen.
In that moment, the fear of man was more than my fear of God.
Right.
And
Well,
now I
that
had
would
the fear
be
of
a
God.
Well, that would be a temptation, obviously, if you're going to be a filmmaker, because one of the things you want to have happen is that you want people to watch your film. So so that's a positive in a way, because you want to make something that's
I'm in a
appealing and
performative.
worthwhile.
I'm in a
Well, that's
performative field.
Right. But the problem is when you're basing your self-worth on your status as a performer, right? Then it becomes about you.
Yes.
And that does make you a puppet. And
Yes.
so one of the things we know as psychologists is that.
And there, Jordan will make a point that he's made that, basically self-attention is hellish. Okay, third clip.
Your wife was watching when she got that message about the fish and the loaves and the fishes. I'd watched to see if an image or an idea flashed into my mind. And one of the things I was doing as a therapist is you'd tell me something and something would be triggered in my mind. So it's associated. Now, we're similar in some way. So if I have an association to what you're saying, it's possible that it's also fleshing out the broader.
Okay, now Peterson is taking, again, he is using now post-epistemic revolution. He is making sense of, from a ground up sort of way, why this move that Jenkins is making of filling in the rest of the story is a legitimate move. But what do you mean by legitimate? See, not all of the Kantian dogs are quieted. I'll say it that way.
Meaning.
Yes.
Now you're taking these biblical stories that are fragments of a narrative, obviously, because the thieves had a life, and you're letting your imagination flesh them out, right?
Yes.
And amplifying them.
Ignatius talked about that. He said, St. Ignatius, when he says we're to read the Bible with a sacred.
And this is where we get into the metagelical, because, well, let's jump back to here. Another interview. So The Chosen is getting big enough, and mass media is getting small enough that the New York Times is now regularly posting stuff on YouTube. And I didn't know about this interview until I read Bethel's Jesus in the Negative World. Really nice treatment of this. I'll put it below. And so I looked up the interview, and it was absolutely fascinating, because Jonathan Rumi is a Roman Catholic. And you have evangelicals quoting church fathers. And you have the chosen colonizing Catholics and Orthodox. And I would imagine, I don't know, I should look. How did I know if I searched YouTube, I would find a conversation between Bishop Barron and Dallas Jenkins? All you materialists out there, oh, it's all about prediction. If your system is good, you'll be able to predict. Bishop Barron is metagetical. He is. I mean, all of these. Now, I know people are, with our tribal silos, we don't want to be seen as losing to someone else, but you can't live in this country and be Christians together and hop from one tribe to the other and not get all of this mixing going on. It's happening. That's what's happening. There they are.
Imagination.
Right.
The text isn't meant. Protestants are uncomfortable with this. I'm an evangelical Protestant. I'm not a Catholic, so I'm raised to be a little more protective and to the fidelity of the text. That's why there aren't too many things like The Chosen, because typically it's, we don't want to expand, and your imagination can run wild into a dangerous area.
It can. There's no doubt about that. But that's also the thing.
He's an evangelical. He's a Protestant. Your imagination can run wild, but we're letting the imagination back in. We are. Because we can't do without it. Plus, it's always been there. We just never wanted to admit it because we had this vision of rationality whereby the imagination was banished.
About the text is the Bible is insanely hyperlinked. And so, like, crazily hyperlinked. It's really the world's first hyperlinked text. And so it's not like there's a linear voyage through the text, because each verse refers to like 5 other verses or 50, and each of them refer to 50. And so there's a lot of imaginative pathways through the text that are valid textual interpretations.
Right.
Now, the Protestants who are skeptical are right that you can deviate and heretically, and that's a problem.
An evangelical would say, well, yes, it's hyperlinked, but stay there. Don't bring your own humanity into the imagination of it. Stick to the text. Yes, this verse is set up by a verse written thousands of years ago, and that's beautiful and that's perfect because God wrote this book. So that's okay. But when you start to bring your own analysis to it, now we're treading on thin ice, and that's for the realm of pastors to provide commentary, not for Dallas Jenkins to tell his own stories.
Okay. So that's for pastors to bring commentary. That's for the church the church is supposed to be the one that has that authority. And so if it's not in the Bible, it can't be there. That's the Protestant move. If it doesn't come from the church, then it can't be there. So this is the metagelical. This is, and so you've got Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox, and they're all making this together. And people are going to be. It's not metagelical. Isn't the sum group of all Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, and then some non-creedals in the country? No. It's a movement, just like evangelicalism was a movement. It's got fringes, and it's much more center set than bounded set. Although there are, because people won't have all of the boxes ticked. And I'm not giving you a definition of it because I can't, just like it's very difficult to define evangelical, but you sort of know them when you see them. But that's where this is. And so super interesting conversation, great conversation, really fun. But this is, now people are just waiting to hear Jordan Peterson say his heart was strangely warmed, or to talk in full-blown secure attachment language to the Father instead of something like trust in the goodness of being. That's rather sort of fake rhesus monkey head with skeleton body and that warm cloth to hold on to instead of the mama monkey. if you remember the little pictures you saw in your college psychology textbooks. So there it is. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. We are living in fun times.